Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to my next video on Deutschland. And today I'm going to be talking about the narratology. So, how is the narrative made up? And I'm just going to do a few slides. A lot of it will be down to your own notes and research. Um, Thanks again for all of your brilliant analysis of the scene. Some are really, really great. Excellent media language, excellent use of theory. I was very, very impressed. So good that you're keeping up with that writing. So, I'll just go straight into it. When we talk about TV shows, we have to consider how the narrative is built up. And two ways in which we can do this is look at the actual series as a whole. And there are two types of narrative that we need to consider. So make sure you're making a note on this. The two important narratives are either the episodic narrative or the serialized narrative. So the episodic narrative is a self-contained story within the show, within the episode. So Friends would be a great example. I mean, even the episodes are called the one where something happens. Um, it all contains in the episode. The characters are always the same. They may learn something that adds to their wider character arc, but generally it's wrapped up at the end, and you never have to watch the next one or the one before to really understand it, unless it's a two-parter. Whereas a serialized narrative is, as you can imagine, serialized. It's in a series. You have to watch it in order, and you have to see every episode in order to really enjoy and understand the full story and narrative. So, Strange Things is an example, but I mean, hundreds of TV shows, and most of them dramas, will have a serialized narrative. Deutschland 83 also employs this, so I'd make sure that you make a note of that because that's really, really key. Another thing you need to consider is also the idea of the multi-stranded narrative, and that's the idea that there are loads of different characters and the different subplots, they all meet the bigger story. So obviously you can kind of see that in Deutschland between Lenora, his aunt, and Martin. It cuts between the two, also his family as well. So in a way it's multi-stranded, it's not just a singular story. And this is just used to further along the story. It's also used to make it more interesting. So Game of Thrones is a great example. It means hundreds of characters, hundreds of subplots. I think it's a literary technique that was famously used by Tolkien as well. It was split up between Aragon, Legolas, all those guys, and the Hobbits. But you could also take it back way further to places like Zola in the 19th century with the Rougon novels, which would go in between different characters. So again, I would also make a note of the idea of this multi-stranded narrative. It's very, very uncommon for a TV show to revolve around one person. But even Breaking Bad splits off into different stories. Um, we also need to consider the idea of narration. So how is the story told to us? And there are also two ways in which we can look at this. One of them is the idea of the omniscient narration, which is the idea that it's completely unrestricted what we know about the story. And the character in the story doesn't always have to know what's going on, but we as the viewer will. So we can either be shown this through camera or shown this through character action or discussion. So I guess in a way we did in Deutschland because we knew Lenora's plan before Martin did. So we are pretty much privy to loads of the stuff that's going on. Another way we can look at it is the restricted narration. Now, restricted narrative, as you can imagine, we restrict the information that we're given to us. So that means that we don't have everything, and that keeps us on our toes. I mean, you could call it Enigma code as well. We could use some BART, and next video I'll be looking at BART as well. And I suppose we only get our information through our protagonist, and there is some part that's restricted in Deutschland. For instance, when Martin steals the documents for the Pershing missiles, we don't know when the general is coming back. We don't know his reaction to the stolen documents. That may well come into play later in the series. So those are two examples. And again, I would make a note, and I would probably use my examples. But if you can think of any examples where the narrative is omniscient or restricted, please do, because the exam board has used this language in particular in order to describe Deutschland. So those are some key words that I would definitely try to employ, and I wouldn't just employ them in TV. I'd try to employ them maybe in the film module, but any other analysis that uses a story, I would definitely use it. Um, You could also use Campbell. Now, Campbell isn't a subscribed theorist on the course, but he's definitely really interesting in terms of storytelling, and most story writers and screenwriters will employ Campbell in their work. George Lucas famously did, and this is the idea of the hero's journey. So most singular, or the monomyth, so that means there is one person story, and he basically we can kind of employ that here. So it's basically the idea that a hero, in order to go through their adventure and their journey, has to go through this structure here. And Martin is somewhat going through that. He is the singular hero, and he's been called to adventure. And we could say that he's called to it when he's abducted by the Stasi. Supernatural aid could also be that Stasi as well, or his girlfriend. And then we're probably about here at the moment. So he's beginning his transformation between East German Stasi and West German soldier or spy. So obviously we can't have all of this done in the first episode because it will be very short. But you could look at Star Wars as an example. He's called to adventure when his when C-3PO and R2-D2 come, but then his uncle and aunt dies, so then he has to work out what it's to be a Jedi, his supernatural, and then a helper comes along and mentor. So that's Han Solo. We've also got Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then we come here. So there's I don't remember Star Wars too well, but when Obi-Wan dies, he has to realize that he's got to transform into this crazy Jedi master, gun shooting. Well, yeah, you get it. I don't remember the film that well. I didn't see the last one though. I think I've given up on Star Wars really. They just keep churning them out to make me more depressed and bored by cinema. Um, but definitely, we'll look at this idea a little bit more in detail when we go through more of it. And it's not necessarily a requirement, but it's definitely good to employ Campbell. And he also has seven different character types, similar to Prop. They're slightly different. Um, I would also say that the Deutschland narrative, and this is what the exam board used, the idea that it's controversial. And I was thinking, why is it controversial? But actually, when you think about it, we're sympathising with essentially, you know, proto-Nazis. The Stasi weren't a great organisation. I'll go into more of the detail on the historical context in a later video. But essentially, 100,000 people imprisoned, probably loads of deaths, don't know how many, assassinations. They basically wiretapped the entirety of East Germany. They gaslighted an entire nation of people. In fact, if you lived in East Germany in before the Berlin Wall fell, you can actually find your file the Stasi had on you. Their surveillance was so vast, and it was very, very similar to how the Nazis operated, but a little bit less genocidal. So I would definitely look into that and consider that. I mean, usually when we look at Cold War stories, it's usually from the perspective of the West. We usually have American or the UK or even France, against the Soviet problem. The packed countries are usually seen as villains. So this is why it's unconventional because you're looking from a Soviet perspective, and it's controversial because essentially we're sympathising with the Stasi officer. Um, we're trying to basically find the plans to nuclear weapons. So that's quite interesting thing to note as well. So there's a little bit of information about the narrative, and we'll go into it more when we're back and when we've developed more on the series. But here are some things for you to consider. So binary opposition. So obviously Levi Strauss's idea that two opposing things can create meaning. So I want you to consider this into your analysis. So I want you to look at how does Deutschland present East and West Germany as binary oppositions? And I'd like to write this as if it were a paragraph. So consider media language, consider costume, mise en scène. How are the two states seen as different? Also, are there any other binary oppositions found in the program? Can you find any others? They don't have to be written in paragraphs, just as note form, but definitely the first one. How are the two opposed? Secondly, we have to employ Todorov because that is a theorist we have to include on the course. So how can you apply the narrative theory to the episode? So how I would do that is I would break it down to the equilibrium, disequilibrium, or disruption, and new equilibrium, and I would like you to find where in the episode these things happen. So what is Martha's equilibrium? Where is the disruption? And then where is the new equilibrium afterwards? So find each part of the episode that can include it. And then finally, next video, I'm going to talk about genre a little bit, and we could basically say that the episode is a hybrid of genres. It's kind of crime, it's kind of spy, it's kind of political, and it's all mixed. So I want you to consider three narrative conventions that you can find in each genre. So when I say narrative conventions, I don't mean costumes. What parts of the story, what parts of the narrative are conventional to either crime, spy, or political? Is there a certain beat, so a certain bit in the episode that could that make you think of these genres? So try and find three narrative conventions for each, and then afterwards, just write a little paragraph. What is the benefit for producers to have a hybridized genre? So why is it beneficial for them to, to merge different things together? And that's really it for this week. And obviously, I'll see you after half term on the with my next video. But definitely try it. If you want to watch it again, please do. I know some of you have watched or started to watch the rest of the series. That's also great too. I mean, we don't need to talk about the rest of the series. We only need to talk about the first episode. But it's good to get wider context. Yeah, so make sure you've got that submitted and how I'd like that. And if you've not done the questions from the previous videos, I'd like you to submit that all together on Wednesday, the 3rd of June. It'll be on Show My Homework as well, which is how you'll probably get this link. And that's all. So if you have any outstanding work, please contact me. And please send it to me. But otherwise, I hope you're all keeping safe and you have a nice as half term as you can have, considering the situation. But yeah, so keep up all the good work, and I will speak to you then. Bye bye.